We learned a hard lesson yesterday with Scott.
Lily extended it for us. Just share that in the chat. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
Lily. Let me just check with someone who is going to be doing video or recording and just see if we get somebody, make sure we do that before we start. Okay, and I heard that he's here, so I think we're good. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to today's session. Really excited to introduce Victor Rivera and Michael Ferris. They're both with the YMCA of USA and work with Diversity Inclusion Global. I've actually worked extensively with Michael and now we're just getting to know Victor as well. But really excited today about our session about developing our understanding of bias. So I'm going to turn it over to them so we can go ahead and get started today.
Awesome. So I'll jump in and then Michael could follow after we get to some points. So thank you all for being here. We know that bias is a hot topic and a conversation that our movement has been happening for a while, in addition to anti-racist, multicultural behaviors and having us move forward in that direction, seeing what has gone on over the last 10 months in our society. So thank you for joining us with the conversation. As always, we want to definitely get together and have some opportunity for you all to speak and share your thoughts on bias and how it fits within the why. So we'll be able to jump through and have that conversation today. But first, we'd like to kind of start off with language. Every time we do this diversity and inclusion work, we always want to level set with language. So when we talk about implicit bias, we'd love to share the definition we've used in many of our trainings and opportunities for conversation. So implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And when we talk about bias, we talk about how everyone has bias. We are not at all anyway able to defy this as humans. So we do have these different things that happen to us unconsciously day to day in our actions and the way we behave. And that actually starts as early as 4 or 5 years old. We start seeing that individuals have bias, and there have been studies that have been completed throughout the years to show this. But we want to really talk about why this is important for transformative change within our organization. So we've done some system change work, and we're talking about transactional work leading to transformational. And there's 6 conditions of systems change, which was released I think a year and a half ago in a document called Water for Systems Change. And it talks about these 3 levels, structural, which is explicit. That's how people see our organization. So our policies, practices, and how our resources flow. And then there's the semi-explicit level, which is our relationships, our connections, and our power dynamics within our organization. But most importantly, at the transformative space, those are the mental models. These are implicit. And again, implicit bias. This is where all that change can happen. We know that if we can change and think, then we can lead into relationship structures, and then we can change policies. It's a great document, but I wanted to break it down even further so we could see how this really flows. And on the next slide, I've set it up so we could see a real simple version. Structural change is our institution, and this is where our institution can change. Next is our culture and beliefs. These are semi-implicit. These are things that help the external audience see how our institution behaves and responds. But most importantly, at the transformation change level is us. So if we can transform as individuals, we'll be able to transform our communities through programs and practices that we develop to meet their needs. But I'm going to pass it over to Michael so he can share where the why fits into this.
Thank you, Victor, and good morning, everyone. Pleasure to connect with you all again, and really looking forward to diving deeper into this conversation. So when we look on our follow-up slide that we have coming up, slide 5, we talk about where does the why fit into this conversation. So when we think about individual bias, as Victor has walked us through, there's also organizational bias that can be created to advance some opportunities. So we know that we're for youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. With youth development, we want to empower young people to reach their full potential. Healthy living, we want to improve individual and community well-being. And with social responsibility, we're thinking about giving back and inspiring action in our communities. And if those are our focal points, what bias can be created? And are we truly for all when we're examining the last two words within our mission statement? So the next set of points that we're going to share are data points related to how young people are impacted within the state of Florida. That's okay, Lisa. You can go to the next slide. And so one of the first ones that we want to share is this slide here. There's a disproportionate arrest rate of juvenile Black residents in Miami-Dade County. 16 out of 100 Black residents aged 15 to 17 were arrested in 2018, but only 4 in 100 Hispanic and Latino residents and 2 in 100 white residents. Where is the why in this conversation? If we look at our next data point related to this, to really outline what this looks like for us, is like 1 in 100 young people that identify as white within the ages of 15 to 17 have their arrest rates. 2 individuals out of 100 between the ages of 15 to 17 are arrested identifying as white, and then 16. So this is representative of 1 in 50, 2 in 50, and then 8 in 50 individuals. Next slide, please. In Florida, 1 in 6,750 Black residents have died from COVID-19. In comparison, 1 in 10,000 white residents have died from COVID-19. And we see that 8.8 of the per 100,000 people or deaths in Florida, 8.8 of those have been of individuals that identify as Hispanic Latino. So if we go back to or think back to our previous slides about youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility, how are we living up to that to improve the health of our communities? Next slide, Lisa. Across South Florida, the Black poverty rate is between 2.7 and 9.3%. And it's higher than the Hispanic Latino poverty rate. So when we're examining that, how are we being inclusive of really mitigating or eliminating the poverties of cycle? What role can the why play in helping to dismantle those opportunities? We know that more and more folks are utilizing food distribution centers, community food engagement opportunities as well. And the why is contributed to passing out and distributing food, but how do we help mitigate the need and mitigate poverty and how it's affecting disproportionately communities of color? Next slide. We would see that Black residents of both sexes or genders in Miami-Dade have similar median or annual incomes, though they make less than both white residents and Hispanic or Latino residents. Now, this ties into conversations that we were having related to advancing this work for our multicultural leadership staff, even within the why. What bias do we have? Are there opportunities for us? When we did that session yesterday, we're really diving into how can we look at making equity adjustments to ensure that we're not contributing to lower median incomes for individuals of color that work for us? And then what role can we play as an organization to either partner with or work with or collaborate with other organizations and entities to address this as well? Next slide, Lisa. So when we talk about, we've given some great examples about what bias is. We want to share the definition from the Kirwan Institute from the Ohio State University. Even though that being someone from Michigan and a Michigan State fan, it is very hard for me to call out Ohio State right now. But what is implicit bias? It refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So what are the attitudes or stereotypes that are affecting our understanding, our actions in an unconscious manner? And so this is the definition that we utilize Why the USA, that is also part of our DIG glossary of terms. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Victor.
Thank you, Michael. So yeah, it was real important for us to use the definition twice, because first we wanted to introduce you to implicit bias, and then we wanted to show you the data points so you could see what some of our actions or understanding of community might have been subconscious, right? So all of these things that Michael has shared have happened over time, and they have happened within our communities. I know Florida is a large state, and some of the examples were Miami-Dade County, but we also really considered the COVID data point, right? When you see that 1 in 10,000 individuals who are white have died from that, versus the 1 in every 6, almost 7,000. But bias shows up in many different ways, and we really wanted to consider there are different types of bias, not just the innate idea of bias. So we're going to have a space now where we could talk about the different types of bias, how they show up, and where they might show up in your organization independently and as a group. So if we go to the next slide, it'll be a quick title slide. But we're going to go into 4 types of bias, and I'm going to tell a quick story. Feel free in the group chat. I'll ask a question, quick call and response. And if anyone would like to talk to it, we could bring you into the space to share your voice. The first type of bias that I'd like to share is affinity bias. And it is the tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. Oh, next slide, sorry. Yeah, here we go. So affinity bias, and that's the tendency for us to warm up to people like ourselves. So before I go into any examples, I'd like to ask folks in the audience, I see that you're here, in the chat box, how can this affect the work that we do at the Y? No takers? All right. So let's think about a few spaces. Again, the tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. So let's think about hiring spaces. When we get someone who's an applicant and they come in and they either went to our same high school, they went to our same college, university, they know someone in our family, they worked at a past employment space that we have, are we going to choose them more likely than we would a candidate who we do not know or does not have the skills that the Y is looking for, but you do have a relationship with? So I love folks to think about the affinity bias in spaces of hiring and spaces of advancement when folks are thinking about what programs to support. We have Christina in the audience. This might also impact how we're actively inviting to join our Y community. That's another great space to consider, right? How do we participate and who do we connect with in our community? Thank you for that. Candace, we aren't changing the affinity bias in all things we do, hiring, programming, donors, role modeling to youth, etc. Thank you for that. So again, great examples there. I would like to go to the next one, which is the halo effect. And the halo effect is the tendency to think that everything about a person is good because you like them. So I see that we're a little more active in the chat. Let's think about how this type of bias affects the workplace or the Y as a whole. And again, Michael shared, you can raise your hand to elevate to share with the group if you choose to. All right. So again, halo effect, thinking everything about a person is good because you like that person. I think about this in the space of performance appraisal. Someone doesn't meet the needs of their role, so therefore, just because you hang with them, you enjoy their company, they're never, I wouldn't say reprimanded, but they aren't held accountable, which is very important for the role and the community that happens. It also pushes people into higher places of employment. It gives them more opportunities to go out for training, and so on and so forth. So that is a space where the halo effect often comes in. And next, I think the chat box, my chat box got stuck. I'm sorry. Yep, the Lonix could perform performance evaluations, problematic behavior. We may give them a pass and not wanting to be mean, and this could be really dangerous if we're ignoring behaviors like potential child safety. Thank you all. Sorry, my box wasn't holding that down. And Shannon, the halo effect could really bring down team morale, right? When folks are seeing that, it's not fair. Thank you, Candace. And that moves on to the next, but not the last, which is perception bias. And perception bias is the tendency to form stereotypes and assumptions about certain groups that make it impossible to make an objective judgment about the members of that group. Again, this can be both internal and external, and I'd love to see some examples. But while we get some examples from the group, I'd like to bring up a story. So we go up to the next slide. I'd also like to ask folks in the chat if anyone knows who this woman is. None yet. All right, so this is Dr. Tamika Cross. Tamika Cross was on a Delta flight a few years back, and an emergency took place on the plane. And she was not in her scrubs, she was just traveling. And when the staff team on the flight asked if there was a doctor available, she raised her hand and shared, "Yes, I'm a doctor, I can help. What's the emergency?" One of the attendants then said, "Oh no, we need a real doctor, not a nurse." So she had her own perception of the way Tamika looked and decided to deny her opportunity to assist the other passenger. And the emergency continued. But this was not the only time that this has happened on a Delta flight. So after this happened, Tamika went to social media and she shared her story, which became widespread. And it even led to the team at the airline making sure that there was bias training and perception training that was taken by the whole team for a few months. But almost a year to the day, the next year, in October, I believe, it happened again. Delta flight is active and there's an emergency on the flight, and a Black doctor from the Boston area says, "I am a doctor." The attendant denied her, but since she had known this has happened in the past, she had a laminated copy of like her doctor card, so she then used that to verify that she was a doctor so she could assist. But she still took her story to social media and to different groups to continue sharing and advocating for the folks who look like her, who are often denied that by perception. So I know these stories can go on, right? We hear these things all the time. So I just wanted to really use that as an example because the organization took all the steps to attempt to mitigate bias in the workplace, but it still continued. And that brings us back to, again, the diagram that I shared earlier, which is the next slide. And you just click right through, again, how the institution looks, how our culture and beliefs work, but really how we as individuals can make the whole external facing organization be different than what we are trying to make it. And again, small individual actions that are implicit that can change the entire structure. So next, I'd like to pass it to Michael so he could talk about the way implicit bias works in information in our minds.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. And real quick, what I will add, and if you all have examples, we'd love to see those in the chat as well. How can perception bias show up within the why? It may show up in the form of, if you're working in youth development and serving members and aspire to become executive director, that someone may tell you, you need to go work in the membership area of an arm of our association before you can become an exec. And maybe not taking into consideration all of the transferable skills that you have in that role of working with parents, working with volunteers, working with your own staff, that you're already involved in some of the basic tenets of membership and or balancing budgets as well. So if you have other examples of how perception bias may show up or that you've experienced yourself or have observed, we'd love to hear from you about those examples as well, which speaks to the information that we're going to share on this particular slide around how many institutions of information that we receive per day. And so if you can click through, Lisa. There you go. At any given moment, our brains are receiving 11 million pieces of information. We can only consciously process about 40 of those pieces, which means if you click through the next point, that 10,999,960 pieces of information we're relying on our subconscious to filter information by taking mental shortcuts. And how do we develop those mental shortcuts? So if you look at the next slide, it talks about how we have a systems 1 and systems 2 brain. So with our systems 1 brain, it is very fast, it's reactive, so it's taking in those and grouping in those other 10 million pieces of information and grouping it in so we can make those fast decisions without even thinking about it. So the example that I usually give for this is you think about driving home from whether it be your work location or somewhere that you're familiar with. And then you drive and you get into your home, whether it be the carport, the garage, the driveway, the street parking, whatever it is where you're parking in front of your residence. And I have, by show of hands, how many of you have ever driven home and then just realized, like, how did I get here? Right? You just got in the car and started driving from that place of work. And then you realize, like, man, I made it home. And that time, it was in no time that I made it there. You didn't even think about it because it was automatic, right? So show of hands, anyone experienced that? Or am I the only one? All right, thank you for that. Yeah, so you just driving and you realize that you made it there, right? But what happens when there's a construction or some other type of holdup on the expressway or roadway that you have to think through? So now you have to slow down and process. All right, maybe I need to head north on 75 and then get off at this exit to go home because the road is backed up. So how do we think through those aspects? That's the systems 2. That's more conscious. That's us slowing down, taking in all types of information to really ask ourselves, why am I making this decision? What is preventing me, or why would I have gone to that first decision? And we need to consider those things when we're thinking about the hiring process. Why are we hiring folks? What program decisions we're making? And Victor is going to talk us through an example that many of us may have seen in a very popular movie from a while ago. Victor?
Yeah, so for sure. So I'm not sure. I'm a big Will Smith fan. Not sure if anyone else is. But early in the 1990s, he was in a film called Men in Black. And as he was auditioning to become a member of the team, they take him down to a shooting range, and he and a few other people in suits. He also stands out because he's in a red jacket with a white T-shirt. They're instructed to take down the enemy. And when this does happen, the strobe lights start happening. Lights go off, and a ton of monsters start popping out, hanging off the buildings, attacking someone, and all these things are happening. And gunshots are firing off, pop, 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 from all the other agents. But Jay, he's not Agent Jay at the time. Jay is still waiting. And at the end, before you see anything, he shoots one bullet. So again, we're thinking about that 11 million bytes of data that are processing in the 40 that he could actually respond to. So then at the end, Zed, who is the curator of this test, comes to him and he says, "Hey, Jay, what happened to you?" He's like, "Oh, I hesitated." What? And then Zed asks, "Why did you shoot little Tiffany?" And out comes a cardboard cutout of a young white girl who looks like a preteen. But what Jay says is, "Well, I was taking my time, and as I saw this one monster hanging from the light post, he had a tissue in his hand, so I thought he was sneezing." No, he was working out. There was another monster with a tissue, so I thought he was sneezing. But then I saw Tiffany, and she's out in the middle of the night with quantum physics books in her hand, so I assume she's up to no good. And then that leads to him being the outlier in the test and actually the only one who then becomes an agent with the Men in Black. And I refer to that as something around bias, because all the time we're shooting these thoughts and ideas and behaviors and actions without taking a step back and mitigating those things like Agent J did, and really assessing the situation to take the proper action. Did I cover that right, Michael?
Yes, sir. And I know you're going to take us through that group think.
Yeah, okay. And when we think about that bias, it brings up the last form of bias that we really wanted to consider, which is groupthink. So we could bring that up. And, I'll keep going. And yep. Yeah, here we go. Groupthink. So right here, this is probably one of the biggest ones that we see affect our society the most. And it's the tendency for people to try too hard to fit in a particular group by mocking others and holding back thoughts and opinions, right? So when you join an organization, when you join a team, you end up participating in the culture and trying to learn it and trying to mimic it. So therefore you fit in and you have a better opportunity to succeed and to not get kicked out. When we think about diversity and inclusion work and our diversity wheel, if you've ever seen it, it really starts at the center with the individual and all the layers that make us up. So we have two options when we join spaces. We either get to be the outlier like Jay and keep our independence, or we lose it to become part of the group at times. And the why is an institution like that. So I'd like to pass it to Michael to ask the group a question regarding groupthink.
Thank you, Victor. And we're going to, if you can raise your hand and respond, we want to have a little bit more dialogue with folks related to this question on the next slide. So when we think about bias and how it shows up for us, the question that we want to pose or think through is that the why, we recognize the why as an institution. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The why is an institution, organization founded for religious and social purpose that you are, and we're all a part of that. And that has shaped the way we may see and do things within the organization. What bias may we might have picked up from the why as an institution, or what have you learned regarding your bias or our organizational bias that you see out in community? So we would love to see folks and hear from you. So if you could raise your hand, Lisa can elevate you to be a part of a conversation with us and for the entire group. So maybe one or two folks, and I could call on people. I know some people in this room to join us too. So we'll wait. So anyone can raise their hand and share. How has bias showed up? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that'd be great if we could have somebody do that. I'm so sorry. When I flip between the two different screens, I'm learning about this system, but I can definitely bring somebody in.
Oh, no problem, Lisa.
I don't know, Michael. You might have to elevate someone. Oh, we got someone. Yay, Delonix.
I was going to call on him anyway. So
well, as far as bias, I mean, I think just overall, the community looks at the whys as the nice people. And we're very diverse. We're looked at as a diverse group, but when you dive deep into it and you learn a little bit more about our landscape as a movement across the board, we may not be as diverse as we think, but for the person coming in to working for the why, you see a lot of diverse people coming in, and even in your why branches, we may have bias saying, oh, we're a very diverse YMCA. We have people who are, Black, white, Asian, Latino, working at all different types of departments. But at the leadership level, when you look deeper into it, we're not as diverse as what our community is, if that makes any sense. And I think we're biased. Like, I know I'm biased when somebody asks me what's one of the best things about the Y. I say diversity, because of the people that we serve and the people that we have within our branches. But as we go higher into leadership positions, your CEOs, your COOs, your vice presidents, those types of positions, we're not as diverse as we want to be. And I think knowing that will help us promote diversity within our ranks, so that our leadership positions mimic what the people that we serve.
Yeah. Thank you for elevating that, Delonix. I think that what some of the things too that we also consider and elevate. You said a lot there, right? So we usually share data points around representational diversity, not just around the race and ethnicity within our organization, but also around gender. So recognizing that almost 78% of our staff team members identify as female, yet only 24% of our CEOs identify as female. There's a huge disproportionate outcome there for representational diversity of who we have working within the organization and who is in leadership roles. Same can be said for staff of color as well. So thank you, Delonix, for elevating those pieces. And I see in the chat, Scott wrote, we promote that we are welcoming, but we are only welcoming to those selected by those empowered, perceived to be empowered or deemed worthy. Scott, would you mind raising your hand to be elevated to share more about that?
Hey, I don't know how much more I have really to add, but I think from any system that I look at, like our leadership development system, although it's intended to provide lots of really great resources, is it really designed in a way that is equitable to those that either need it or have a further path on what we are considering like as the traditional Y path to leadership. And I think that over time, we've allowed people to conform to this is how you become a leader in the Y, and it doesn't always allow us to have the right people at the table to foster innovation or different ways of thinking, or really strengthen what our vision is, right? Which is strengthening communities. And it's really hard to do that when you have the same people with the same viewpoints in leadership all the time. It just creates another form of bias in that.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I think some of the things that you're touching on was that in my career, one of my former CEOs would always share with us around just getting outside that idea of groupthink that Victor walked us through, right? If we're all thinking the same, then there really isn't much thinking going on. And so how do we diversify our thinking of addressing opportunities as well within our organization? So how do we get more diverse thought involved and engaged in the process as well for us as we're advancing and trying to learn and grow with community? Thank you for sharing that, Scott. Any other ideas and folks want to elevate or write in the chat if you share some of those thoughts as well. We'd love to hear from more folks as well.
Oh, there we go. We got some.
All right, Carol.
Carol, down at the bottom, you can click the microphone. It won't work on the one that actually shows your name. So just down at the bottom.
Is that better?
Yep. There you go, Karen.
I think the why being founded on Christian principles and, the foundation of it, starting with Bible study, I do believe that as an institution, we're challenged on not being biased in regards to religion.
Carol, that's a great example, and it does come up when we think about engaging board members. Victor and I both have worked with Ys that have looked to diversify their board and engaging folks from various religions. And, they worked, one Y in particular, they had been building a relationship with this individual that identified as Jewish for their faith. And had a very good relationship with the Y, was a member. And when this board, CVO, the chief volunteer officer, and the CEO approached them about joining, their hesitancy was, well, I thought the Y to be in a position on the board, it was just for those that identified as Christian. And even leaving out those individuals that identified as Catholic as a form of Christianity. So it's something that we need to work through and also help educate folks. So, Carol, really appreciate you elevating that as well.
Yeah, I would challenge us even, for some Ys that are still doing prayers before meetings and whatnot, being inclusive of letting people pray of different faiths to expose us all to those different, areas. So anyway, thanks.
No, they're great points. Thank you for elevating that. Others?
I was going to share, Michael, and Carol brought it up as we bring the next person up. I think about the time I was asked to read Jesus CEO by one of my leaders. And Carol, thank you for bringing up that idea of Christianity and the why. And I remember like two of the learnings are love yourself and thy neighbor, right? Like thinking about the way we engage with community and things of that nature. But also one of them was do not be hypocritical. And I really think about that, right? Like when we say our mission and we do our things, we have to make sure that our actions match that. And it's a gap that we often have to bridge so that we could truly serve community and kind of get rid of the perception bias that we may have. So I thought about that. And thank you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Vic, for sharing that. Delonix?
Yeah, I just wanted to also just bring up, you guys talked about advisory boards and boards. I think we have a bias as Y professionals, as directors and executives, that to go after a person to be on our board that is like a banker or has a high professional like a job or successful. But, I have known YMCAs who've had stay-at-home moms who have been the best board members in getting donations and really pushing the why and advocating for the why. So sometimes we have a bias of just leaning towards, oh, you have to be successful to be on our board, but not necessarily looking at the people that we actually serve who know our YMCA, who know the people who attend our YMCA and who can advocate as best better than anyone else can. And we tend to be biased against those people and just kind of put them to the side and ignore them. And, we'll ask you to do this and this, but we won't ask you to be on our advisory board. So I think we're guilty of being biased in that way, in, not being able to bring people to the table on our higher level positions as far as volunteer positions and high level volunteers. Not bringing people to the table that we know are going to be ambassadors of the Y. And we tend to be a little bit biased because they may not be a banker, they may not be a lawyer, they may not be, serving on the school board or anything like that. So I just wanted to bring that up.
No, Delonix, that's a great point. I think what typically what we may see is that we go for affluence and not influence. And so when we think about the opportunities that folks bring, and to your point about those members those individuals that may be members that may know their why, better than any bank or any other person, they also may carry something that we may need to pour more value in as far as social capital, right? So they may not have the financial capital that some folks are looking for from a board member to give a certain amount, but they may be able to influence folks socially because they, one, know their why, and that is their why. And they also may know the needs of their community. So how do we engage in both, with knowing our community, knowing what the needs of our why are, and then engaging all, because we do need those individuals that may have a little bit more financial influence or capital to be engaged in the conversation. We also need those individuals that are more closely tied to grassroots to, one, maintain that identity with community. Also, they may be able to elevate the voice of community. And if we're looking at one end of the spectrum, we may not get that voice of the community when it comes to decision making and opportunities that we have within the West. So really appreciate you elevating that, Delonix, as well. I see Melissa wrote in the chat. Melissa, would you mind raising your hand and sharing with everyone if you're able?
Hi, everybody. Sorry it took me a second to figure out how to unmute. Yesterday, I just opened a brand new YMCA here at Florida's First Coast, and we worked really hard to have a diverse staff team. But one thing remained consistent, which is we're founded on Christian beliefs. So our influences were mostly Christian, and that's not always the case. So in Kids Zone, they were doing a lot of Christmas activities recently. So I challenged my youth program coordinator to start thinking about other religions during this time of the year and how we can incorporate that into our engagement activities in Kids Zone. And a question came up, well, what if we're questioned? We're founded on Christian beliefs, and how do we explain that we're now teaching, about Hanukkah or Ramadan or anything else really? And the response was, we just have to do our best to explain that we're an all-inclusive organization. And even though we're founded on Christian beliefs, we are all-inclusive, and we want to make sure that everybody feels welcomed.
Yes, thank you for elevating that, Melissa. And it is a great point, and it is something that we look to consider of sharing that we're inclusive. And to your point, you think about all the opportunities, especially during this season, that we celebrate, whether it be other religions, when we have Hanukkah, or we think about Kwanzaa, that comes up in sharing, a representation in how different cultures celebrate during this holiday season. So really appreciate that conversation. And if there are opportunities that, or conversations that folks are having that you would like myself, Victor, or other members of our team to be a part of and support, feel free to reach out to us. We can assist and be of support to you all as well. Any others? Go ahead, Vic. I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about what Delonix shared and seeing Christina's comments, and I'd love to hear more about the youth aspect and boards and tying that together. But I think about wealth and youth and the unconventional, not even just the new ways that folks are building wealth. And when I read Christina's comment, I thought about Ryan from YouTube and how in 2018 he was the highest grossing YouTuber, making like 19 million. So thinking about really how youth can influence the organization, but also help if someone's looking for like a give-get. But his mom is super innovative. But I'd love to hear what Christina has to share about youth, because I don't think we reached that aspect yet. If you're willing to share.
Just put her on blast. I think you got to hit mute in the toolbar at the bottom, Christina.
To share. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. So I work a lot with teens, and I think that this is something really important to elevate because I don't want to take the focus away from engaging our teens because I think that is so important as well. But I think it's really important to look at our boards as a whole and think about, who we want our Y to be serving, our entire community, and make sure that the folks who are on our board are representative of the folks that we want to be including, because you might have people in their 20s who have something to contribute. You might have someone who is really invested in community issues. And I think we just need to stop limiting ourselves to just thinking about people who have very established connections with the community or people who are wealthy, because I think that is limiting, and that diversity needs to be visible throughout our Ys. So that might be our boards, but it might also be our membership and really what it looks like to be inclusive from top to bottom.
No, absolutely, Christina. I really appreciate you elevating those pieces around serving our young people as well. We have this huge focus on change makers right now as an organization. And one thing that I've been challenging people on as far as conversations, most of the time when we think about those change makers, it's external to our organization, meaning the young people that are outside. My question is, how are we engaging change makers now? How are they part of the decisions and the conversations that we elevate as an organization now versus waiting to say that we're doing something externally that we aren't even practicing internally with the folks that may identify as being individuals in their 20s right now, and we're not engaging them in conversations within the org around strategy or opportunities that we have to engage community differently as well. So thinking through those pieces and opportunities that may come up as a collective whole. So really appreciate you elevating that, Christina. And sorry, I wasn't catching up as far with the chat. It got delayed, and then all of a sudden I saw the comments after Vic mentioned it. So really appreciate you all sharing and coming to those pieces. And I see Lisa said we had 3 minutes to go a minute ago, so that means we're down to 2. So I will turn it back over to Victor, who's going to walk us through some opportunities that we have to help mitigate bias for us as individuals and within the organization. Victor?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thank you all for the conversation. I really appreciate that. So real quick, we said we wanted to start discussing bias, understand it a little deeper, and see how it affects the work that we do. So we did create a few small steps on how to change it, but how to really think about how we can identify areas of institutional bias. So on the next slide, we'll be able to see just a quick tip, right? We're thinking about the Y as an organization and with its culture. And we know that all these small decisions and attitudes that we have contribute to the way our organization is perceived by the community. So how do we really identify the areas of institutional bias to work on? We need to be cognitive of the policies, practices, and the culture. As I shared in that diagram with the 6 steps, that's the first thing that folks see when they engage with the Y. They don't automatically see our culture and they don't automatically understand our mindset. But if our policies and practices are exclusive or lean in just one direction or the other, people will be able to see that. And then that connects them to our brand, which is not just the way we market, but the way people feel when they interact with us. And then lastly, thinking about how it is all these small decisions that we make. So if we have blind spots as individuals,